Good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well. It is April the 13th, and I just wanted to do something really fun with you before we get started with this lesson. Would You Rather is a fun game that we like to play here at my house. So we're going to do Would You Rather A, be able to control the weather, so you decide, or B, be able to talk to animals. So if you wanted to be able to control the weather, in other words, would you like to be able to make it rain or have the sunshine? Or would you like to, oops, sorry, would you like to have, other words, have a conversation with a dog, a cat, a chicken, or a fish? Now, here at my house, I have a dog named Shiloh, and he is so funny. And sometimes I really would like for him to be able to talk to me and tell me what he's thinking, because he can be really hyper and run around the house. And then sometimes he can just look at me like, what are you doing, lady? All right, so we're going to go ahead and get on with our lesson. Oh, but before we do that, I'd like to go ahead and tell you which one I would rather like. I would rather like to be able to talk to animals. All right, I wonder which one you would rather like to do. You can send me that message in talking points. I would love to hear from you and see which one you would rather like to do. All right, we are going to learn we are going to compare and contrast. Now, I know you've done this in class during the school year, but it's always important to review some skills, to listen to some news stories, and see if you can master that skill. So our learning target today is compare and contrast two or more versions of the same story. And that's what we're doing here with two Cinderella stories. They're not traditional Cinderella stories. They're by different authors and different cultures. Your success criteria is to write similarities and differences of the two stories using a Venn diagram. Some of you might remember what a Venn diagram is. I'll show you a picture of it. If you don't have one at your house, it's no problem. All you have to do is draw two circles that overlap, and then the center part is going to be the compare part. And we'll talk in detail about that in just a minute. But let me draw your attention to the photos that are up on the top of the board. If you see the photo of the butterflies, you have they are very similar because of their colors and their design, but they're also different because of their size. One is big, one's little, one's large, one's small. Same meaning. I just said it a little bit differently. But in contrast, you have these apples. Apples are the same. These are two apples, same fruit. However, in contrast, or meaning that they're different, because one is green and one is red. Now, I want you to look at the center of the photograph of the animals up here. I want you to figure out how they're similar and how they're different. Can you state that in English out loud right now? That's right. One is actually a zebra, and it has stripes, whereas the other one is different. The contrast, it's brown, and this looks like a type of stallion. That's type of horse. And it has hair on its back. However, the hair is not striped like the zebras. All right, remember our success criteria today is going to be able to write similarities and differences of two animals using a Venn diagram. All right, in order to compare, you have to know the difference between compare and contrast. Compare means how are they alike or how are the same. And contrast means how are they different or not alike. So in this photo here, we've got two girls, and that's how when we're comparing them how they're alike, they're girls, right? But in contrast, notice their hair color. One girl has black hair, one girl has blonde hair or yellow hair. However, when we contrast them, one has straight hair and the other one has curly hair. All right, we're going to move on to the activity, but I want you to see what an example of a Venn diagram is. When we had a class this year, we actually talked about a book called The Stinky Cheese. Some of us listened to that story along with the Gingerbread Man. And this is a really good example of comparing and contrasting The compare part would actually be in the center, meaning the same, how they're the same. And the contrast portion would be underneath the name of that book. And I know all of you have heard this story, the Three Little Pigs and the Little Red Riding Hood. And if you've got the screen, you can look at the screen and see that under the Three Little Pigs, it shows they start listing. The wolf didn't eat anything. He wanted to eat the pigs, right? And then the little red hen, the wolf did not eat the people. And then in the center, it starts listing how they're the same. So this is a really good example of how to compare and contrast using a Venn diagram. These two circles overlapping is called a Venn diagram. All right, so what you're going to do for the next about 10, 20 minutes, you're going to listen to two stories. One is called Cinderella, and it's about a little girl who goes to a basketball ball. So she doesn't go to a fancy dance. She basically goes to a big basketball game. But it's very similar. A lot of the things that happen in the story are similar to the traditional Cinderella story, where she goes to a ball and she has a godmother. So there's some things that are very similar into that. So you're going to watch this story called Cinderella, but then you're also going to watch this story called Bubba the Cowboy Prince. And it is very similar to the Cinderella story. And this story is going to last you about 10 minutes. And it has the same concept. He goes to a big dance, and he has a fairy god cow, not a fairy godmother. So you're going to watch these two stories, then we're going to come back and we're going to start working on how we can compare these two stories. So enjoy the stories. All right, so you have watched these two stories. Now what we're going to do is, in order to get ready to compare Cinderella and Bubba the Cowboy Prince, you're going to have to start just writing a little list down. So what I want you to do is, on a scratch piece of paper, I just want you to draw a straight line down on your paper, or you can even fold your paper. That might be even a better idea. You fold it in half. And so you can write Cinderella on one side, Bubba the Cowboy on the other side, and list the characters in the story and maybe the events that took place in the story. I did the first one for you. So under the Bubba the Cowboy Prince, Bubba lived in Texas. That was an easy peasy one. Miss Parker did the easy one. And then Cinderella lived in New York City, right? She lived in New York City. So now just take a few minutes, write down on your paper some things that you remember about both stories. All right, now that you've made your list, you are actually going to draw on your paper a Venn diagram. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Miss Proctor's even has a little crazy bump right there, see? But it's perfectly fine. You just take your paper and you just draw your Venn diagram, your two circles that overlap, and you write Cinderella on one side and you write Bubba the Cowboy Prince on the other side. And then you're going to start comparing and contrasting these two stories. And what's really neat about this is you already use that other side of your paper to write down some things that you remembered about each story. All right, so what were the similarities in the two stories? What were the differences in the two stories? Which story did you like best and why? You can send me a message on Talking Points and let me know which story you enjoyed the best. But before you go, all your hard work that you put in comparing and contrasting these two stories, let's check your work. All right, so up here on the board, we've got compare and contrast Bubba the Cowboy Prince. He did live in Texas with his stepdad and his stepbrothers. However, contrasting, Cinderella lived in New York City. She lived with her older sisters. And this is so silly, But I want you to look here. If you noticed in the story, Bubba the cowboy prince, he didn't have a fairy godmother. He had a god cow, whereas Cinderella had a god ma. That's what she kept calling her, was god ma. And and Bubba the cowboy, he lost his cowboy boot, whereas Elly, she lost her glass sneaker. Her glass sneaker. She didn't have a glass slipper. She had a glass sneaker. And they both went to a dance. Elly went to a basketball game, whereas Bubba went to a ball. He went to the ball. It was a dance. They danced to country music and did like they called it a hoedown. I think that's what they called it. Cinderella, she had a curfew, so she had to be in the house by 10 o'clock, whereas something terrible happened to Bubba. When the clock struck midnight, all his fancy outfit turned into rags. And Miss Laureline, she fell in love with Bubba and they got married. But Prince Charming, that was at the basketball game, he actually walked down the street holding Elly's hand. Now you're thinking, Miss Proctor, I'm not real sure if I got the compare part right, but that's okay. Let's look at the list. They both lost their shoe. Both Prince Charming and Miss Laureline looked for the owner of the shoe, so that's how that's the same. So I hope you guys enjoyed comparing and contrasting these two stories. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to message me on Talking Points so that I can help you further compare and contrast stories that you're reading at home. Have a great learning day, and I will see you next time.